must face the reality. There's too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It's the #1 cause of global warming. Last year, CO2 emissions reached a record high of 32 gigatons, and we're continuously adding more, 1,000 tons per second. Inevitably, that means temperatures will rise by at least 3 degrees Celsius. If we want to avoid that, cutting down our CO2 emissions is the obvious solution. But what if we pulled carbon dioxide out of the air?
To stabilize global warming, CO2 emissions will have to reach net zero as quickly as possible. Some sectors of the economy are difficult to decarbonize. Transport, for example. So at some point, we'll have to remove CO2 out of the air to compensate for residual emissions.
So how exactly would that work? To start, soil, the ocean, and forests naturally absorb carbon dioxide, as plants rely on sunlight and CO2 to grow. So the first thing that comes to mind is to plant trees wherever we can. It's easy and cheap, but there's one major problem. It would take a lot of space. So wouldn't it be brilliant if advanced technology could just stop climate change? Well, apparently, there's already a magic trick. It's called direct air capture. This is how it works. Air is pumped into a machine, a giant vacuum cleaner that traps CO2. Then it can be stored and sold for chemical and construction purposes.
The heart of our technology is a novel filter material which specifically captures the CO2 on its surface once it's in contact with ambient air.
Climeworks is the first commercial enterprise of its kind. Each year, their plant in Iceland captures 1,000 tons of CO2. Carbon dioxide is then dissolved in water and injected into volcanic rock. Within 2 years, it turns into stone, effectively locking up the gas underground for millions of years.
Climeworks' goal is to capture 1% of global CO2 emissions by the year 2025. That's a very ambitious goal that we've set ourselves, and we're aware of that. We do deem that feasible and realistic.
But I know what you're thinking. We can sit back, relax, and limit our efforts to reduce CO2 emissions?
It's not a silver bullet solution because it raises a lot of technological questions, not just the maturity of the technology, but also the stability of the storage capacity. And it's simply not feasible for these technologies to replace us doing full efforts on decarbonizing our economies.
Carbon capture technologies come with a hefty price tag, which explains why their development has been slow. At Climeworks, it costs between $600 to $800 to remove 1 ton of CO2. For it to be profitable, it would have to cost $100 per ton. Everyone is trying to make something out of this environmental headache, and one scientist may have hit the jackpot. Harvard professor Daniel Nocera has found a way to turn CO2 into something useful, using a small leaf that mimics natural photosynthesis. He joins us on the program to talk about his invention that could change the world.
One of our goals has been to do exactly what photosynthesis does. We didn't use a leaf, we called it the artificial leaf. It was a piece of silicon with special coatings, and that, when it absorbs sunlight, splits water to hydrogen and oxygen. And then we took the hydrogen and fed it to a bacteria that breathes in the carbon dioxide and makes liquid fuel. The process we invented works 10 times more efficient than natural photosynthesis. So in principle, you could make liquid fuels. We have made liquid fuels in the lab, things like petrol or diesel, and you could burn them just like any petrol or diesel. So that really works. Direct air capture is a very expensive proposition. But if you have bacteria and they're in a large area, just like any plant, they can do the CO2 capture for you. Therefore, using biology and the natural processes of biology to do carbon dioxide air capture, that's actually much cheaper than technologically trying to do CO2 capture.
Technological and industrial progress, the big culprits of CO2 levels, could turn out to be our greatest allies. But we can't miss the bigger picture. Above all, we must continue reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, and new technologies are not an excuse for us to keep polluting with no end in sight.